Hi, in this presentation I'm going to talk about Mary Shelley and her troubled life. The life of a great writer, and without Mary Shelley and her Frankenstein, we wouldn't have had science fiction today. While some authors have never achieved notoriety during their lifetime, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, at only 19 years of age, just like you, set the literary world on fire with the publication of her first novel, Frankenstein, a modern Prometheus. What I'm going to focus now is what were the shaping influences which we could see as the genesis of her prodigy. This is Mary Shelley. On her left, her father, William Godwin, and her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Pretty important parents. She was born on August the 30th and she lived only 54 years. But what years they were, you will see. She was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, the brilliant feminist who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and a very, very highly controversial book, and the brilliant William Godwin, a famous social theorist. In fact, he was a meliorist, believing in the endless perfectibility of man and the notion that as we evolved, societies must by necessity get better and better until a perfect world would come to be. Both her parents were original and they opposed marriage, yet Mary became the occasion of their nuptials, in large part perhaps because of inheritance or estate laws in England at the time. Fanny Imlay, who was Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter to a previous relationship, would eventually become one of Mary's close friends. An open family, we would call it now. 10 days after delivering Mary, her mother developed puerperal fever, a rapidly advancing infection, and died. Her mother's untimely death would have far-reaching consequences for the rest of Mary's life. Why? First of all, Mary idolizes her deceased mother and never fully resolves the separation anxiety she feels. Imagine her spending her time at her mother's grave, where she went to rest, reflect, and write. Within 4 years of her mother's death, her father marries again, and she married a very conventional widow, Mary Jane Clairmont, who had two children, Jane and Charles. By all accounts, her stepmother was unsympathetic to Mary's needs and passes the duties of raising the younger to the servants of the house. On the positive side, the cultural background where she lived was great. In fact, her father's friends are among the greatest intellectuals of the time, and we can assume that Mary benefited from the company of the likes of poets like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Charles Lamb, and also Percy Shelley. She had a period where she was very disconsolate and lonely, so that her parents decided to send her away to a foster home in Scotland, the Baxters of Dundee. And another tragic and sad time. Nevertheless, she gets to know a certain someone, a visitor to the home of the Baxters. In fact, on May the 5th, 1814, at the age of 17, she falls in love with Percy Bysshe Shelley. We know of this momentous event because Mary records the date in her diary. Only one slight problem, though. Percy is already married. His first wife, Harriet, learns of his affair and is not amenable to Percy's suggestion that she accepts the affair and remains married to him. Also, her father is outraged that Shelley would have used his daughter so, and threatens to have her cut off from the estate. So, behaving as young lovers do, they eloped to Europe. In 1815, Mary prematurely gives birth to a daughter, Clara, and in Switzerland they had another child, William. They also got married in the meantime. She is only 19 years old. Her father would refuse communication with her for 2.5 years. So her personal triumphs now are swallowed up by a life of deep tragedy. I told you we would focus on the tragedies to understand the genesis of her novel. This is the museum in Piazza di Spagna in Rome. I really recommend visiting. So while Percy and Mary were swept away on a maelstrom of romance and passion to the European continent, Harriet, remember Percy's ex-wife, had committed suicide. Mary's father threatened to disown her, and Mary had lost her first child 8 days after giving birth. As if it weren't enough, on October the 9th, 1817, Mary learns that her half-sister, Fanny Imlay, commits suicide by overdosing on laudanum, a tincture of opium. This is also a very dark period. The ever-mounting difficulties of living a family life abroad begins to exact a terrible toll. In 1818, in fact, Clara Shelley dies, barely a year old, her daughter. And the following year, also her son, William, passes away, having only attained his 3rd birthday. 5 months after William's death, Percy Florence is born, and his name, Florence, derived from their favorite place of sojourn, Florence in Italy, where in the meantime they had moved. And this is really a tragic event because on July the 8th, her flamboyant life reached its point of greatest desolation. In fact, while sailing with his close friend in his boat, Ariel, yes, like the spirit from Shakespeare's The Tempest, in the Gulf of Spezia, Percy drowned. And Mary's whirlwind existence came to an abrupt halt, no stop, and she was left anguished, exhausted, and despairing for the life to come. Percy's body was found 10 days later. Volumes of Sophocles and the poetry of Keats were found in his pockets. As you can see, his life was a kind of piece of art, of literature. He was cremated. In fact, now you can see his ashes interred in the Protestant cemetery in Rome. Just to finish, Mary Shelley herself would die of complications of a brain tumor, and in the meantime she went back home, and at least she was surrounded by the tranquil sunshine of family affection, and in the end believed herself to be a truly fortunate woman. Her body rests between her parents in the churchyard of St. Peter's at Bournemouth. So it hasn't been a happy presentation, and my intention, my goal was to give you a framework to understand better the greatness of this lady who, out of her sorrow, anguish, despair, and sense of death, was able to build a piece of art and literature like the great science fiction novel Frankenstein. Thank you very much for your attention.